It was just a regular Thursday morning when Marian's phone buzzed on the counter. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, expecting it to be a weather alert or a coupon from the pharmacy. But what she saw stopped her in place. "Mom, don't come for Christmas. Chloe isn't comfortable having you here." She stared at the message like it had been written in another language. Then she read it again. And again. Her heart didn't race. It sank down into her chest like a stone. A sharp kind of quiet filled the kitchen. The kettle hissed behind her, forgotten. She stood there, the message burning in her hand, wishing it would suddenly rewrite itself into something softer. But it didn't. It stayed cold and final. 3 weeks earlier, she had emptied her entire life into a miracle. She sold the home she raised her son in, the car she'd driven for 15 years, pieces of jewelry passed down from her mother, all to save Evan and Chloe's house from being taken by the bank. $450,000. Every cent she had. And the few pieces of jewelry passed down from her mother, all to save Evan and Chloe's house from being taken by the bank. $450,000. Every cent she had. And the few pieces of jewelry passed down from her mother, all to save Evan and Chloe's house from being taken by the bank. $450,000. Every cent she had. Just gone. She'd done it without hesitation. Because that's what a mother does, right? She saves her child. She sacrifices. And then she gets a text message asking her not to come for Christmas. She stared out the window, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. A 71-year-old woman in a small apartment, holding a phone like it was a weapon. All she typed back was, "Okay. Noted." But that night, lying in the quiet that only empty apartments know, something inside her shifted. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She wasn't even angry. Not yet. But she felt the sharp beginning of something. The start of a line being drawn. For the first time in her life, Marian realized she wasn't going to be the doormat anymore. And what she did next? It changed everything. Because this isn't just the story of a hurtful message. It's the moment a mother decided to stop disappearing and start collecting everything life still owed her. Marian didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling every heartbeat like a hammer inside her chest. One question kept coming back to her. How did it come to this? She had raised Evan on her own. His father left when he was barely 5, just disappeared one day and never came back. She had worked nights at the hospital, holidays, double shifts, never complaining. Just surviving. For Evan, she remembered the nights he would fall asleep on the couch waiting for her to come home, still wearing his little school uniform, holding one of his drawings in his hand. And she remembered every sacrifice that followed. Birthday parties she missed because she was on shift. The broken fridge she didn't replace because Evan needed a new laptop. The vacation she never took because tuition had to be paid. But she never once hesitated. Because her son mattered more than anything. When Evan graduated from college, she felt like it had all been worth it. He stood tall in his cap and gown, and she could barely hold the camera steady for the tears in her eyes. He hugged her that day, pulled her close and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom." She held on to that memory now, like it was the last piece of a puzzle that no longer fit. And then Chloe entered the picture. From the very beginning, Marian had tried. She welcomed Chloe with warmth, made her favorite dishes, always offered help without stepping too far in. But there was always a wall. A polite, polished coldness. Chloe never said anything cruel, but that was the thing. It was what she didn't say. The way her smile faded when Marian spoke. The way she would change the subject when Marian shared old stories. Evan never noticed. Or if he did, he never acknowledged it. He was always looking down at his phone, or nodding vaguely, as if distracted by something more important. Still, Marian stayed hopeful. She told herself it would change. That maybe Chloe just needed time. That maybe she'd done something wrong without realizing it. But then came the call. 6 months ago, Evan's voice had cracked on the phone. "Mom, we're going to lose the house." He was breathless, terrified. The bank had started foreclosure. They had fallen behind. Chloe had lost a contract. Evan's hours had been cut. "We owe almost $500,000. If we can't pay in 2 months, it's over. She didn't think. She acted. She sold the house where she raised him, the one with pencil marks on the doorframe tracking his height through the years. She sold the car that never failed her once in 15 winters. And the jewelry. Her mother's last gift, a gold locket with a tiny photograph inside. She gave Evan everything. And Chloe? She just stood behind him the day Marian handed over the check, arms crossed, face unreadable. No hug, no thanks, just a nod, like Marian had done what was expected of her. She remembered going home that evening to her new apartment, a place with peeling paint, a humming refrigerator that never shut up, and the smell of old cooking oil in the hallway. She told herself it was temporary, that she had done the right thing. Now, 3 weeks later, after everything, a text. Don't come for Christmas. Marian sat at the kitchen table that morning, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, her hands steady, her chest hollow. They had taken everything from her. And now they were pretending she didn't exist. But not anymore. She stood up slowly and walked to the old shoebox she kept in the back of her closet. Inside were papers, not many, but important ones. The ones her accountant had told her to insist on. The contract, the signatures, the clause they hadn't read carefully. The lien. She traced her finger down the inked lines and felt something shift in her body. Not rage, not vengeance, something older, something quieter, clarity. It was time to stop hoping for gratitude. Time to stop apologizing for existing. It was time to get her life back. Because sometimes it's not anger that changes everything, it's quiet resolve. And Marian was about to uncover the secret her son had no idea would break his world apart. It started with a walk down the hallway. Marian knocked on the door 2 apartments down, where her neighbor Ellen lived. Ellen was in her late 60s, sharp as a tack and never afraid to say what she thought. She had worked as a legal assistant for 3 decades, and in this building full of widows and pensioners, she was the one people went to when they needed more than just a cup of sugar. When Ellen opened the door and saw Marian standing there, pale and quiet, she didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Marian sat down slowly on the old floral couch, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of her sweater. And then, for the first time since the message, she let the whole truth pour out. Every detail. The $450,000. The sale of her home. The silence that followed. The cruel text. Ellen didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodding occasionally, eyes narrowing at the name Chloe. When Marian was finished, Ellen leaned back, folded her arms, and let out a low whistle. That, she said finally, is not just cruel. That's calculated. Something's off here. Marian blinked. You think there's more to it? I think, Ellen said, you don't give up your mother's heirlooms to save someone's house only to get iced out weeks later unless there's something they don't want you to see. You need to find out what. Marian hesitated. You think I should investigate? Not think, Ellen said firmly. I know you should. And with that, the gears began to turn. Ellen made a few phone calls that afternoon. One to a retired investigator she used to work with, a man named Ray who now did small private cases to keep busy and pay off his boat. He agreed to meet Marian the next day. When she sat across from Ray in the back of a modest coffee shop, she felt something strange, not guilt, not fear, but nervous anticipation. She told him everything, sliding across names, addresses, and whatever details she could remember about Evan and Chloe's schedule. Ray scribbled things down in a small spiral notebook. You want to know if they're planning something? He asked. I want to know why, Marian said quietly. Why I was cut out after I saved them. I want to know what changed. Ray looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll look into it. The next 2 weeks crawled. Marian filled her days with quiet chores, folding laundry, visiting the pharmacy, sipping tea in silence. She tried not to imagine what Ray might find. But late at night, the questions came like a wave. Were they hiding something? Was Evan part of it? Had she been used from the very beginning? And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Ray called. I've got something, he said. And, you're going to want to sit down for this. They met again in the coffee shop. Ray walked in holding a plain folder, worn at the edges. He sat down across from her, his face unreadable. What I'm about to show you, he said gently, isn't just business. It's betrayal. He opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, photos, transaction records, copies of listings. And there it was. Chloe was planning to sell the house. The same house Marian had saved. Ray pointed to an email thread between Chloe and a private real estate agent. In it, she asked how to discreetly list the property, inquired about transferring funds under her name only, and made it clear her husband didn't need to be involved in the details. Marian's breath caught in her throat. She's preparing to cash out, Ray said. And your son? From everything I can tell, he has no idea. Marian stared at the photos. Chloe meeting a man in a parking lot, walking arm in arm at an upscale restaurant, sitting across a table, smiling. This guy's not your son, Ray added quietly. He's a bank manager. They've been seeing each other for months. Marian couldn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. Her chest felt hollow again, but it was different now. Not grief, not confusion, something colder. She had given everything to her son. And now, the woman he trusted most was preparing to leave him, and walk away with the home Marian had bled for. Do they know about the lien? She asked, voice hoarse. Ray shook his head. Doubt it, but if they try to sell, you've got them legally cornered. That lien holds real weight. Marian exhaled slowly, feeling something settle in her bones. They thought she was just a fragile old woman in a cheap apartment. They thought she wouldn't fight. They thought wrong, because when quiet women decide to fight back, they don't just rattle the walls, they bring the whole house down. Marian had never seen herself as powerful. She was a helper, a caretaker, a fixer, the person who held things together when they were falling apart. But never the person who drew lines, who made threats, who demanded anything. Until now, that night, after her meeting with Ray, she didn't cry. She didn't even feel like crying. Instead, she pulled out the old metal box from under her bed, the one where she kept every important piece of her life. Birth certificates, her nursing license, her mother's locket, the one she hadn't been able to part with, even when she sold the rest of the jewelry. And there it was, the contract. Neatly folded, carefully signed, and sealed in a plastic slip. It was more than just paper. It was protection. It was proof that she hadn't given her life away for free. Marian had insisted on it that day. Evan had hesitated, looking embarrassed. Mom, I don't need to sign anything. It's not like I'm going to vanish. But she'd smiled and said, it's not for now. It's for the future, just in case. He had rolled his eyes, but he signed. What he didn't know, what neither of them had noticed, was the clause at the bottom. If the property was sold within 5 years, full repayment would be due immediately, and because of the registered lien, the sale couldn't be completed without her consent. Marian ran her fingers across that paragraph like it was armor. She had done it right. She had protected herself, even when she didn't think she'd need to. The next day, she met with Ellen again. The older woman read the contract carefully, her eyebrows rising with each line. You've got them cornered, she said finally. Tighter than they even realize. Then why'd I feel so sick? Marian whispered. Because you're a mother, Ellen replied. And mothers aren't built to destroy their children, even when they deserve it. Marian looked out the window. The sun was hitting the rooftop across the street, turning the shingles golden. Life was going on. The buses still ran, the shops still opened, the world kept spinning, but something inside her had shifted forever. Ellen leaned forward, her voice firmer now. Listen to me. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And it's not just about the money, Marian. It's about reminding them you're not disposable. That you matter. That everything you gave has value. Marian nodded slowly. So what do I do next? You let them walk right into it, Ellen said. Let them think you're still quiet. Still passive. Let them think they've won. And then? Ellen smiled, a fierce little glint in her eye. And then, you remind them who really owns that house. The next few weeks were a strange kind of calm. Marian didn't call Evan. She didn't reach out. She didn't stop by or send hopeful messages. She simply disappeared. The silence was deliberate, and it worked. Ray continued to send updates. Chloe had officially listed the house, discreetly, through a private agent. She was doing everything under Evan's nose, timing the sale perfectly during the holidays. They're trying to close on December 28th, Ray reported over the phone one evening. Right after Christmas. She thinks no one's paying attention. Marian stood at her window, holding a mug of warm tea, the city lights glowing in the distance. That house had been saved by her. And now, it was being stolen in slow motion. But not if she could help it. She picked up her phone and called the only lawyer Ellen trusted, a real estate and family law expert named Thomas. He agreed to meet her the following week. When Marian showed him the contract, the lien paperwork, and Ray's report, he read everything in silence. When he finally looked up, he said simply, "This is solid. If they try to sell, you can stop it cold. And if you want to make a statement, I can help you make it unforgettable." Marian raised an eyebrow. How unforgettable? Thomas closed the folder and smiled slightly. Let's say, you'll never be invisible to them again. She didn't know exactly what she'd do yet. But one thing was clear. They had no idea what was coming. Because this wasn't just about stopping a sale, it was about reclaiming something far more valuable. And Marian was done waiting for permission to be respected. December came in quietly. The city sparkled with decorations, store windows filled with garlands and warm yellow lights. Children rushed through the streets in puffy jackets, their breath fogging the air. Neighbors hung wreaths and wrapped porch railings in twinkling bulbs. Joy was everywhere but Marian's apartment. Her place stayed undecorated. No tree, no candles, not even a strand of lights. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. This wasn't a Christmas for pretending. She didn't want cheer. She wanted truth. Ray's latest message came just before dinner. He texted a photo of a for sale, under offer, sign discreetly placed at the edge of Evan's lawn, barely visible from the street. They're closing soon. The buyer's offer came in at $530,000. Chloe's pushing to finalize right after Christmas, the message read. Marian stared at the image. That sign might as well have been a knife. They were doing it, behind Evan's back, using her sacrifice to finance a future that didn't include her, or even him. She texted back one word. Ready. The next morning, she met Thomas in his office. He was calm, direct, efficient, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he never had to. You could stop the sale now, he said, tapping the stack of documents between them. We have everything, but I think you deserve something more. Marian raised an eyebrow. More? Let them get right to the edge. Let them think it's done. And then, on Christmas Day, the day they told you not to come, you show up. With me. With these documents. And you remind them this house exists because of you. Marian looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. Not anymore. I want that, she said. The plan was set. She would arrive on December 25th, in the early evening, just as families gathered at their tables, just as Chloe and Evan played their perfect couple for Chloe's family. Thomas would come with her, carrying the notarized contract and lien documents. The timing would be deliberate. The delivery, undeniable. Ellen, when she heard the plan, let out a soft laugh and said, "You're about to serve justice hotter than any Christmas ham." But Marian didn't laugh. She was already far beyond amusement. This wasn't revenge. It was necessity. The days crept forward. She went about her routine. She didn't call Evan. She didn't ask how he was. The silence was her strategy now. The silence made her invisible again. Exactly how they wanted her. And then, 3 days before Christmas, her phone lit up with a message from Evan. She froze. It was the first message she'd received from him in weeks. Mom, I hope you're doing well. We'll be spending Christmas with Chloe's family this year. Maybe we can get together around New Year's. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just another gentle dismissal, sent like a weather update. And this time, Marian smiled. Not a bitter smile. A knowing one. Because he had no idea what was coming. On Christmas Eve, she prepared quietly. She laid out her clothes, a deep green dress, simple but elegant. The same shade her late mother once wore on holidays. She pressed it carefully and hung it by the door. Her purse was already packed, the contract, the receipts, the lien documentation, all neatly arranged in a folder. The truth, printed and ready. She ate dinner alone, baked chicken and roasted vegetables on a small ceramic plate. No candles, no music, just quiet, but inside, she didn't feel alone. She felt grounded, present, unbreakable. By the time she went to bed, her bags were ready, her heart steady. And in the silence of her small apartment, Marian closed her eyes with a calm she hadn't felt in months. She would see her son tomorrow. She would see everything. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can carry is the truth, and Marian was about to deliver it on the day they thought she'd stay away forever. December 25th arrived. The streets were hushed under the glow of holiday lights, and the air carried that crisp stillness only winter mornings seem to know. Marian had been up since dawn, not from nerves, but from something deeper. Anticipation. She showered slowly, pressed her dress once more, slipped on her coat and buttoned it carefully, like she was suiting up for something more than a visit. Her green dress shimmered faintly under the winter sun. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a woman who refused to be pitied. At exactly 5 o'clock, Thomas pulled up outside her apartment in a black sedan. He stepped out in a tailored coat and carried a leather briefcase in his hand, calm, professional, unshakable. "You ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Marian took it without hesitation. "I've never been more ready." The ride was silent, but not tense. The kind of silence that comes before something necessary. As they pulled up to Evan and Chloe's home, Marian saw the house glowing with soft golden lights, a wreath on the door, laughter bubbling from inside. Cars lined the driveway. She spotted Chloe's mother's SUV, along with her brother's cars. They were hosting the perfect Christmas. She smiled faintly. "Let's see how perfect it stays." They walked up the steps together. Thomas knocked, a firm, clear knock. Inside, the music dimmed. Voices hushed. A few moments later, the door opened. And there stood Chloe. She was radiant in red, polished makeup, perfect curls, the image of festive charm. Until she saw Marian. Her face dropped a half-inch, just enough for the mask to crack. Then she saw Thomas beside her, holding a briefcase, and the color drained from her face. "Marian," she said, tight-lipped. "What are you doing here?" Before Marian could respond, Thomas stepped forward, calm and direct. "Good evening. I'm Thomas Reed, legal representative for Mrs. Marian Avery. We need to speak to you and Mr. Evan Avery immediately regarding this property." Chloe blinked. Her smile twitched like it wanted to crawl away from her face. This is a bad time. We're in the middle of Christmas dinner." "I understand," Thomas replied, unbothered. "But this can't wait." She hesitated, clearly calculating. Then turned her head and called into the house. "Evan, your mother's here. With a lawyer." Her voice was coated in sugar and vinegar. Evan's footsteps came quickly, and when he appeared in the doorway, wearing a pale blue shirt and blinking in confusion, Marian saw something flash through him. Surprise, then discomfort, then guilt. "Mom, what's going on?" Marian stepped forward now, meeting his eyes. Her voice was even, steady. "You signed a contract when I gave you the money to save this house. That contract included a lien. That lien gives me legal authority over any attempt to sell this home." Evan frowned, glancing at Chloe. "What are you talking about? Sell?" Thomas stepped forward. "Perhaps you should invite us in." Chloe started to protest, but Evan stepped aside, motioning them inside. "Let's talk." They entered the warm, over-decorated living room. A massive Christmas tree glowed in the corner. Chloe's family sat awkwardly around the table, half turned toward the unfolding scene like spectators at a play they didn't buy tickets to. Marian didn't shrink from the room. She stood tall in the center. Thomas laid the documents on the coffee table. "This is the loan agreement Mr. Avery signed 6 months ago. In it, he received $450,000 from Mrs. Avery to pay off the foreclosure balance. It clearly states that the property cannot be sold without her written consent for 5 years. Furthermore, the lien is registered with the city. Any attempt to sell the house without her approval constitutes fraud. The room was silent. Evan picked up the papers, scanning the lines. His hands trembled slightly. I didn't see this clause. I didn't think. Marian's voice cut gently through the air. You didn't think you needed to read it because you thought you'd never hurt me. Chloe's lips were drawn tight, but her eyes darted. Cornered. This is outrageous, she snapped. You can't just come in here and ruin our Christmas. Marian turned to her, calm, poised. You ruined Christmas the moment you told my son I wasn't welcome. Chloe opened her mouth, but Thomas spoke first. This won't take long. We're not here to disrupt your holiday. We're here to prevent an illegal sale scheduled for 3 days from now. Evan turned sharply. What sale? Marian watched the color drain from his face as Chloe tried to form words. Evan, I was going to tell you. It's a good offer. I was waiting for the right time. Evan's voice broke. You were selling our house behind my back? The air in the room changed. Every eye was on Chloe. And Marian reached into her purse and pulled out one last folder. Evan, she said quietly. You should see this too. Inside were Ray's photos. Chloe with another man, arm in arm, kissing, smiling, dining together. Evan took one look, and the color left his face completely. Who is this? Silence. Then Chloe, quietly, his name is Darren. Evan stared at the image. You're having an affair? It's not what you think. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Of course it is. Marian didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her son stood in the wreckage of his illusions, looking at the woman he thought he loved, and realizing she had planned to take everything. And the mother he pushed away? She was the only one standing beside him. Because sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come with shouting, they come dressed in red, holding secrets wrapped like gifts. And Marian was just getting started. Evan didn't sit. He couldn't. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the photographs, Chloe and a stranger, over and over again. Different days, different outfits, but always the same closeness. The same betrayal. Around the dining table, Chloe's family sat frozen. Her mother's fork hovered midair, her brothers stared at the plates, and someone had turned the music off. All that was left was the low hum of the heater and the sound of paper rustling in Evan's trembling hands. He finally looked up. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. Chloe didn't deny it. She straightened her back, like she was preparing for a performance. Evan, things haven't been right between us for a long time. You're never home. You're always working. I felt. She glanced briefly at her family, alone. Darren made me feel seen. You felt seen? Evan laughed again, sharp this time, almost bitter. You felt seen while I worked double shifts and my mother sold her house to save ours? You don't understand. No, Marian said quietly. He does now. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate. The woman they thought they could discard now stood taller than anyone in the room. I gave you everything, she said, looking at Evan. Not just money. My home, my safety, my memories. I sold the only things I had left, my car, my jewelry, my future, because you called me crying, and I still saw my little boy scared on the other end of the line. Her voice never cracked, but everyone in the room could feel the weight of it. I didn't ask for gratitude. I didn't expect repayment, but I thought, at the very least, I'd earned a place at your table on Christmas. Evan's face crumbled. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Marian turned slowly to Chloe. You told him I was intrusive. That I was too much. That I didn't belong. Chloe's jaw clenched. You sold the lie with such sweetness, didn't you? So quietly that no one even noticed what you were doing. Chloe didn't respond. And then, a quiet gasp. Chloe's mother had picked up the email printouts. She was reading them now, mouth twitching with disbelief. Chloe, her voice was small. You told the agent to keep the sale in your name? You said Evan didn't need to know? Chloe's brothers looked at her now, not with sympathy, but with unease. I was protecting us, Chloe snapped. I was going to use the money to start over. I was going to pay back Marian eventually. You were going to steal from her, Thomas said sharply. That's what this is. Fraud. And now everyone here knows it. Evan sank onto the arm of the couch, rubbing his temples. He looked at Marian, eyes wet. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to see it yourself, she said softly. I didn't want to be the mother who dragged your life into court. I wanted to be the mother who gave you a chance to wake up. Silence. Then, finally, Chloe's mother stood. She walked slowly to her daughter, handed her the stack of printed emails, and whispered, "You've embarrassed all of us." "Mom, no," she said, louder now. "You cheated. You lied. You tried to take everything and leave the one person who gave you a life." Chloe stared at her mother in shock. "So you're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of decency," her mother replied. "And frankly, I'm ashamed I raised a daughter who doesn't know the difference." Chloe's mouth trembled. "This isn't fair." Thomas stepped forward. "Let me be clear. If you attempt to proceed with the sale, we'll file for injunctive relief. You'll lose the deposit. You'll likely face a lawsuit from the buyer. And we'll press charges for attempted fraud." "I didn't," Chloe started, but her voice faltered. Marian stepped forward once more. "You can lie all you want," she said. "But you don't get to erase me. Not anymore." Evan looked up at her. His eyes weren't just full of shame now. They were full of grief. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." She nodded. "I believe you. But that doesn't erase what's happened." Behind them, Chloe's family started to gather their things quietly. A napkin folded here. A wine glass set down there. One by one, they slipped out of the room. Chloe was left standing in the center of the holiday scene she had built, the glowing tree, the untouched food, the empty chairs. All of it hollow. And Marian, standing firm, was the only thing in the room that felt real. Because the truth, once spoken, doesn't vanish, it echoes. And Chloe's perfect world? It was about to fall silent in the loudest way possible. The living room felt colder now, even with the fireplace flickering in the corner. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes darting from face to face like she was still looking for an exit that no longer existed. Her mother had left, her brothers too. Even the music had stopped, that cheery background soundtrack Evan once insisted on every holiday. Now it just felt like the house was holding its breath. No one moved. Thomas quietly packed his folder and stepped toward Marian. "I'll be in the car when you're ready." She nodded, grateful. "Thank you." As he slipped out the door, Evan stood. His shoulders sagged as he looked around at the remnants of a life he thought he understood. The tree, the empty plates, the woman beside him who wasn't who he thought she was. "You really were going to sell it," he said to Chloe, the disbelief in his voice slowly turning to quiet anger. "Without telling me. After everything." Chloe crossed her arms, defiant but faltering. "I was trying to protect myself." "From what?" he asked. "From me?" She didn't answer. Marian took a slow breath and walked toward the front window. The wreath Chloe had hung weeks ago swayed slightly in the breeze outside. It was a pretty house. Not just in appearance, in memory. She had helped Evan paint the kitchen cabinets that summer. She remembered laughing when they spilled paint on the dog. She remembered the first time she'd sat at that table, hopeful. That hope was long gone now. But she didn't feel empty anymore. "I'm not going to press charges," Marian said quietly. Chloe's head snapped up. Evan looked at her, confused. "Why not?" "Because I didn't come here to punish," she said. "I came here to be heard. And I have been." She turned to Chloe, her voice steady but low. "You're not worth the energy it would take to ruin. But I will be filing a formal block on the sale. That house, my money, isn't going anywhere without my say." Chloe clenched her jaw, but said nothing. Marian continued, "And once that's filed, I want nothing from either of you. No dinners, no apologies, no explanations." Evan stepped forward. "Mom, please. I didn't know. I swear to you." She held up a hand. "I believe you," she said again. "But that's not the point." He swallowed hard. "Then what is?" The point is that you let someone else decide how much space I was allowed to take up in your life. You stood there and watched as I was pushed aside, and you called it peace. You let someone cut me out, and you didn't fight for me." Evan's mouth opened slightly. His voice cracked. "I didn't know how to handle it. I taught you better than that," Marian said. The room was still again. Not hostile, just quiet, honest. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marian stepped back toward the door and reached for her coat. Evan moved to help her, but she slipped into it on her own. "You don't have to shut me out forever," he said behind her. She turned, looking him in the eye. "No, I don't, but for once, I'm not the one doing the waiting." Evan looked like he had more to say, but Marian didn't wait for him to say it. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold evening air. Outside, Thomas stood by the car, the passenger door open. Marian walked toward him, her steps slow but confident. As she slid into the seat and closed the door, she looked out the window one last time. Through the glass, she saw Evan still standing in the doorway, framed by lights, but not shining. For the first time, she didn't feel sorry for him. She just felt free. Because walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a person can do. And Marian? She had one final chapter to write, on her own terms. The car ride back was silent. Not uncomfortable, just still. Thomas didn't speak, and Marian didn't need him to. She watched the streets roll by, glowing faintly under street lamps and fading wreaths. Houses blurred past her window. Warm windows, quiet families, the flicker of candles on dining tables. It could have been a sad drive. But it wasn't. It was peaceful. Thomas pulled up outside her apartment and stepped out to open her door. She smiled softly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Are you all right?" She paused, hand on the edge of the door, then nodded. "I think I will be." She walked up the stairs alone. No gifts in her hands. No leftovers. No tinsel clinging to her coat. Just a woman returning to a life no one thought she'd be brave enough to claim. Inside, the apartment was dark and quiet. The radiator hissed. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook, then stood for a moment in the silence. She should have felt small, empty, but she didn't. Instead, she felt like something had finally ended. And something else, something better, was just beginning. That night, she made tea. She sat in the worn armchair by the window with a blanket over her lap and the contract still sitting on the coffee table. She didn't need to reread it. She just needed to remember. She had done something hard. And she had survived it. The next morning, Marian rose early. Not because she had to. But because she wanted to. She walked 2 blocks down to a small bookstore she hadn't visited in years. It was owned by a soft-spoken man named Jonas, who remembered her name and always offered her the good chair by the fireplace in the back. She bought a novel she'd been meaning to read since the 90s. A Quiet Joy. After that, she stopped by the community center. They were hosting a post-holiday brunch for seniors, free coffee, donated pastries, folding chairs with mismatched cushions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of people like her, people who had been overlooked, forgotten, underestimated, and still showed up anyway. Ellen was already there, of course, holding court at a corner table. When she saw Marian, she stood with a grin and held out her arms. "Well?" she asked. "Did you burn the place down?" Marian chuckled and hugged her tightly. "No, but I might have turned off the lights on my way out." They sat. Marian shared what had happened, not every detail, but enough. Ellen didn't interrupt, just listened with a kind of reverent quiet that only another woman of her age could understand. When Marian finished, Ellen reached across the table and gently tapped her hand. "You did it. You chose yourself." Marian nodded slowly. "It feels strange." "Strange is good," Ellen said. "Strange means you're finally not walking the same worn path. You're making a new one." And that's when it hit her. For the first time in her entire life, Marian had no one to take care of. No one asking, no one expecting, no one leaning on her until she bent. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. That night, she stood at her window again, tea in hand, watching the lights from other people's windows. Somewhere across the city, Evan was piecing through the ruins of his life. And Chloe, well, Marian had a feeling Chloe wouldn't be sticking around long now that the sale was dead. But that wasn't her business anymore. Marian had spent a lifetime shrinking, bending, giving until she was almost gone. Now, she was beginning again, slowly, quietly, on her own. Because this story didn't end with revenge. It ended with a woman rediscovering her power, and deciding that from now on, her peace would never be up for negotiation. January came in like a whisper. The holidays passed without much fuss. No calls from Evan, no texts, and Marian didn't expect any. Maybe he was still grieving the life he thought he had. Maybe he was too ashamed. Maybe he still hadn't figured out how to separate guilt from gratitude. It didn't matter. Marian had stopped waiting for people to find their way to her. She was learning to find her way to herself. She now spent her mornings reading by the window with fresh coffee, the kind she used to consider too expensive for just one person. She lit candles in the evening and cooked small, beautiful meals for herself, not because anyone was watching, but because she finally believed she was worth the effort. Sometimes, she'd go for long walks with Ellen, talking about everything and nothing, the neighbor's new dog, the library's busted heater, how strange it felt to laugh again. And every so often, late at night, she'd pull the folder from under her bed, the one with the lien, the signed contract, the truth, and she'd look at it not with anger, but with pride. She hadn't just saved Evan's home. She had saved herself. One morning in early February, a letter arrived. No return address, but she knew the handwriting. Evan. She held it for a moment before opening it. Her hands were steady. Inside was a short note, handwritten. No apologies, no excuses. Just a single page with words he had never been brave enough to say out loud. Mom, I don't know how to come back from this. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that everything you warned me about, you were right. I didn't see her. I didn't see you. I see it now. I hope one day you'll let me earn my place again. Love, Evan. She folded the letter slowly. Placed it in the drawer with the others. Old birthday cards, notes from her nursing days, photos from summers long gone. But she didn't write back. Not yet. Not because she was angry. But because healing, she had learned, wasn't a performance. It didn't need to happen on someone else's timeline. And it didn't mean picking up broken pieces and pretending they'd never been dropped. It meant building something new, not out of guilt, but out of truth. And Marian had only just begun. That weekend, she signed up for a pottery class at the community center. It wasn't something she'd ever done before. She wasn't sure she'd be any good at it. But she liked the idea of shaping something with her own hands. Of creating something solid, centered. The instructor, a woman in her 30s with blue hair and clay under her fingernails, handed her a block and said, "Don't worry about making it perfect. Just get your hands dirty." Marian smiled. She was starting to understand that now, life didn't have to be perfect to be hers. Final note. She had been the silent backbone of a family, the giver, the helper, the forgotten. But this story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about reclaiming money. It was about reclaiming worth. And Marian, quiet, steady, underestimated Marian, had finally chosen herself. And that was the most powerful thing she ever did.